So, Chris Corkery, CEO and founder of Hundred Acre, thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, we've been having a couple of technical difficulties back and forth as we were trying to get through the interview earlier. But I had asked, as someone who spent a lot of time as a chef in New York, I was wondering about the impulse for you to start a vertical farm and how that happened.
Not so much, yeah, the impulse, but more the impetus behind it. You know, I had the opportunity to work within some very high-end establishments in New York City. So, you're in one of the largest cities in the world, urban city centers. And we had a strong attention to our supply chain and a consideration around sourcing local, not to necessarily just support local businesses blindly, but more so what it's supporting on a larger ecosystem level. So I was early on kind of scrambling to get to the farmers markets when they were setting up around 5:30, 6 in the morning in the dead of summer in these, areas like Union Square. And it was interesting because you were in there before anyone else was awake, except for the farmers themselves coming down from, 2, 3, 4 hours north in the Hudson Valley region and trying to beat out the other low-level chefs to get the best possible produce, which is pretty cool. It's sort of, like that cooking show where they got to run around the grocery store grabbing what they can to make what they do.
Yeah.
So the first thing was that occurred out of that was really the understanding and respect for the products themselves, because you were trying to get the best, and in order to do that, you had to learn what was the best, and you had to try to get it before someone else did. Secondly, you then learn the story of the farmer and the passion that they put into this. And I think that was a really unique experience for me living, in this large city where we often have everything come to us rather than we go to it. And, that's kind of where the light bulb turned on over my head, where I thought, well, geez, I'm technically right now standing in, this is an urban farm, but the farm came to us. What if we bring the farm, what if we take it a step further and actually bring the farm to the city permanently, right? Set up shop within inner city areas where this can occur year round, not just as a point of sale, but the actual growing, so that there's new jobs, there's community education experiences, and it's not just seasonal, but it's in fact, year round. Every single week, you got a fresh harvest, and you're offering this to within your backyard, the freshest possible ingredients, no matter what's happening outside.
When you talk about this passion for food, and obviously having worked in some of these really great restaurants, you're now actually producing produce. And is this something that goes far back for you, this love affair with food?
Yeah, it wasn't really a love affair. It was more like it was one of my siblings.
Hmm.
I grew up as an only child, and within a middling, like just an average family, and my parents had to, deal with me. And what that does when you're an only child, there's a few paths that kind of pan out commonly. One is that you're along for the ride with your parents at an early age, so you're exposed to a lot. And you kind of grow up a little bit quicker. You learn how to talk to adults, whatever it is. Well, one of those components, my mom brought me into the kitchen at like 5, which is remarkable. I mean, in the beginning, I'm like, helping like make the cookie dough, right? And I'm probably destroying it, and she's throwing it out behind my back and then making the real one that we're going to eat because all the eggshells are in there. But
Yeah.
the point is you're kind of exposed to that, and I was exposed to that, and I got really into it. And I think at a very early age, I was able to make some basic things like an egg dish or cookies and stuff like that. Nothing too crazy or fancy, but I don't know, that maybe, before even the urban farm component with the light bulb going off, I think the food component with the light bulb going off occurred subconsciously, basically when I was a toddler. And it became this hobby that I carried through. I mean, I was always cooking at home with my small little family. Because I was an only child, my birthdays, I didn't have to share, right? So I was able to go to some high-end restaurants or try things that maybe most kids wouldn't be able to try because it was just me. So I was trying some pretty unique food, like an ostrich burger at 8 years old, eating sushi at 9, whatever. And then going into high school, I did what was pretty obvious, which was jump into the hospitality game, food and beverage, and to make money for a job. Like I was cleaning dishes at like a Irish pub, money under the table at like 14, and I really never let go of what a restaurant, the restaurant experience is, not just for a job, but what it stands for the community. And really what I did was everything from back of the house dishwashing to front of the house fussing, waiting tables, bartending, managing, and then eventually, becoming a high-end chef. So I really covered the entire space. And I thought it was, to me, it's symbolic, it's emotional. It's almost like the last frontier or horizon for how we interact, because everything's getting replaced with, the digital engagement. And I think people really now are starting to regret that. So maybe we'll see a renaissance back into spaces where we interact. And I think it's going to be over food.
I would imagine people have this outside perspective of what really happens in a restaurant because of shows like Chef's Table and now with this new show, The Bear. I'm wondering if you've had a chance to see it and if you've had feedback from people who probably tend to glamorize what the life of a chef is like as opposed to what really happens day to day.
The show's pretty accurate, which is why it's so popular. It depends on the environment you're in, but I think the average decent restaurant operates like that, where top down you got this stressed out, like reactionary management, because they just can't possibly plan for what can go wrong. So you just go with the flow each day. You wake up. That there is a significant alignment to how the mentality of a farmer and how they operate, by the way, because you can't control Mother Nature. So you kind of just have to go with the flow. But yeah, back to the restaurant thing. Yeah, I think the average, it does a good job, depicting the average decent space where hardware breaks, staff break, your customers break you, and the cycle repeats. I think the point of the show and the point of being successful in the space and why you should get into it is really to try to figure out where the harmony is in that whole process. And that's where the successful people live. I worked at one point at Gramercy Tavern, and that's a remark, which is it's under Danny Meyer, part of the Union Hospitality Group. And the environment is almost like, it's somewhat tranquil and zen-like in the kitchen for the most part. And that's because of the ownership and the executive chef and sort of their ethos coming in, and just how you work and how you plan ahead, and and then you execute. And it should be a somewhat therapeutic process when working with food. It always was, and it still should be. It should not become this toxic, minefield of stress bombs.
So after your time in the restaurants, I saw that you had started and worked at the green design build firm New York Seed. Can you talk a little bit about your time there?
Yeah. So what you're looking at is sort of my journey from around the ideas of where I am today. I had put the cart before the horse in terms of how I wanted to get started. I thought it was a good idea to form companies, like an entity with a brand, and then fill it in with the business itself, of making money, because I always knew that I had a big idea and I wanted to make sure that I captured it before I started working. And sure, that sounds good on paper, but that was really more my ego and my heart talking, and it wasn't practical. Just start with the basics and build off of it, right? Work, it costs $1, make $2, rinse and repeat. NY Seed was the first of a few more organizations that I formed along the way. And the idea of NY Seed is that we really are focused on adaptive reuse of distressed real estate. So how can we take existing properties that they haven't figured out what to do with it, and we come in and apply some sort of food program to the space, because that seems to always be the right fit. And I'm not talking about restaurants, by the way. I'm talking about community potentially nonprofit-based outlets around food education, commissary operations where it's a shared space for people to come in part-time and do what they need to do, or even growing indoors. So that was really our vision with NY Seed was, farm food fun, grow, cook, and learn about, all things food within these spaces and why it would work as opposed to other ideas that are out there or like, let's say restaurants. These are generally in more distressed areas, lower income areas. So, you're talking about manufacturing, you're talking about community education, you're talking about off-site cooking. These are all things that generally happen in more affordable areas. We wanted to kind of bring them all together under one roof. And that's what NY Seeds sort of started to bring together.
We've touched upon your time in New York City a bit, and the focus on community seems to be something that's important for you from what I'm gathering. It's this idea of giving back to the community or supporting community. As I may have mentioned earlier, I actually grew up in New York. I grew up in Yonkers, and I've lived in New York City as well. So the concept of a food desert is something that's very common there, and access to fresh food is very rare. So obviously that's starting to change a little bit, but I was wondering if that's something you've been kind of near and dear to your heart, based on your experiences growing up.
Well, I mean, the reason I'm involved in food is that it brings us together. So I burnt out working in the corporate world because I felt very disconnected, both from the end product that I was delivering and also the workplace culture that I was working within across the industry. I just felt, sure, it's the most lonely, crowded room in the market. Food inherently, it brings us together. A, we all got to eat, and B, we tend to like to do it together for thousands of years. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, no matter what our wacky world brings online. I don't care how much social media or how many new platforms exist. I don't care what Apple comes out with from a VR experiential standpoint. None of this stuff is going to put food in your mouth and recreate that experience. And there's just something innate, and it's almost impossible to describe. I would love your viewers to come up with words on how to describe this, but like when you are eating something, there's taste, touch, smell, all the five senses are engaged, and you're having this like very interpersonal experience, and then you're looking outward and looking at the person across the table. And you might not even talk about it, but it's happening every bite. So just think about that. It's pretty cool. So what does that all mean? Well, that's just screaming, okay, community is surrounding this. There's an inherent community around every bite, every seed, every plant we grow, every dish we make with our partners. There's always a communal aspect to it. And if that's the business I'm in, which is, growing food and getting it out to the surrounding area, right? I live to serve my neighbors just by default. That's what I do. They're within a close radius intentionally, and we should generally know each other in some way. There's a community that is already pre-existing when the farm is up and running. And that's always how farms have existed. I mean, farms literally were probably the first centers of community ever during the, agricultural revolution. And we learned how to, bring these things together. Different small little pockets of tribes would come together there, realizing that they were more efficient and productive together as opposed to apart. And they would, kind of nurture and reap the rewards off the land. So farms are at the epicenter of and they're the birthplace of community. So all I'm doing is going back to the basics and bringing it into a unique new environment within the inner city because we can due to technology. So our business model is designed in such a way that, we need to make sure that we're able to do that without losing money. I can grow a head of lettuce for more than it costs within this city. And then you have to start thinking about what touches that. Well, it's all things community. So it's not like an option for 100 Acre to give back, and it's not an obligation. It's just part of the DNA and how we operate. We are hiring local. We are inherently running an open door policy, allowing folks to, kind of from the outside to look in and see what's happening. And we are selling to folks within a close area who are then feeding others or they're feeding their families at home. And it all kind of comes back to the farm. So that ecosystem there naturally. And then it's just my job to make sure that it's articulated correctly and managed in a sustainable way, and then try to continue to elevate that and scale it up. So we're always giving back, whether it's intentionally or unintentional. It's just there. And that feels really good because I don't have to work too hard to do good.
That makes sense. So, what is that founding story like? How does someone from New York end up in Wisconsin working at a vertical farm?
Yeah, so you heard a little bit about my, yes, the childhood was sort of the childhood experiences was what got me turned on to like just, messing around in the kitchen and working with food. And I never really let go of that. Then I worked in restaurants, so I really
Yeah.
like that workplace culture. And then I mentioned, fast forward, I went into corporate America. I was working in like global brand development, advertising for almost a decade, and doing the more prudent thing and making a good amount of money, enough money where I burnt out and I retired. And in that early retirement, I was asking myself what I want to do. So I then was like, you know what, one thing I haven't really done well or figured out in the whole food space is being a professional chef, not just cooking, but a chef. And so I went to culinary school. I quit, went to culinary school, and then kind of went into like a 3-year circuit of cooking. Was yes chef all the way before anyone heard, watch the show Bear. It's legit. We're all chefs, by the way. Everyone's chef. Even the dishwasher could be
Yeah.
chef. And in fact, the dishwasher is probably one of the most important roles in the entire space. And yeah, the cooking thing, that's where I got turned on to, sourcing, sustainable sourcing and high quality products that were freshly harvested due to that farmer's market experience. And what that did was I put on my business hat and thought, well, what is this really? And it's really around, supply chain resilience, and how can we create this process that's occurring how can we reinforce this process and do it in a repeatable way? And I just kept coming back to the idea of, controlled environment growing, and all that it affords. So that's what was happening in New York, except as we were kind of testing our model to figure out how the numbers would work, at the end of the day, it just won't. Real estate won't work. The cost of real estate is prohibitive. So, someone turned me on to the Midwest, and in particular, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I did a quick, market assessment. I visited and did a market assessment and thought, well, wow, there's a lot of empty buildings that have been empty for a while due to the exodus of manufacturing. There is an agricultural and manufacturing heritage here that,
Yep.
Would be sympathetic to my efforts. And, because here, essentially we're like a renaissance of both in a better way, a healthy way. And there's an up and coming food scene in this city, and it's now in the news and stuff. And I think I timed the market pretty well based on what I saw. But most importantly, from a community aspect, this is still a very divided city, and it's got a lot of issues. So I think we're a solution on the economic, social, environmental front. So we're really hitting all three, and by opening something like this. So when looking at this market, I thought this would be a great place to do this. And, obviously I had I funded this initiative. So I thought, well, my dollar is going to be worth, X, this much more in this market versus another market.
Yeah.
So I could build it even bigger and better, which could
Yep.
mean also bigger failure. But, here we are having this conversation, and so far it's worked out, and we're looking to scale up today.
So, Chris, as someone who's coming into indoor farming as an owner, operator, as a farmer, what were some of the unknowns that you had to figure out? And how did you start to realize what it is that you don't know? Because there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to indoor farming, some of which we've discussed on this show in previous conversations: energy concerns, expenditures, capex, and all this sort of stuff. How did you prepare for, and how much of it did you have to learn on the spot?
I would say about a little bit under 50% of what we prepared for applied, and the majority was either wrong or just
Mm.
unknown. That's changing every year as more people do what I'm doing and the information gets out there and podcasts like this exist. The challenge is that there's no single turnkey like unit of measurement for how this is all done correctly. There's, in addition to how what you're choosing to grow, and there's how you're growing it, where you're growing it, who is growing it, you know, there's just so many variables that apply to the approach, you know, and then you have to take into effect the macroeconomic factors like, I opened into record inflation. I opened into, the tail end of COVID, which was a complete breakdown in distribution. I opened into a labor crisis where no one could seem to find entry level or, manual labor working within the food space. They just weren't there. They just disappeared. I don't know where they went. So I had no people. I had increased costs. I had lack of access to materials. And all the while I'm opening a startup, which in and of itself, it's hard with a green, highly perishable widget that's got to move very quick, which is fickle to even get it to its quality. And then once it's there, you got to figure out what to do next. So we got sucker punched quite a few times in addition to what already exists in the startup land. On the flip side, I had some resources. I had to reach into my own pocket quite a few times. So this cost me 3 times as much as I thought it would. I'm all in and invested into this. Obviously we're now looking at bringing in outside investors and me being able to breathe, but this is not for the faint of heart. I would say start very small. There's no such thing as needing some kind of apparatus that has a schedule for growing, and you can create and you can understand the inputs and the outputs on a routine basis. There's your foundation, but don't go too big. It's because what can go wrong will, and then also it'll go wrong again and again and again. It's nonstop. And any traditional farmer would say that because, again, they're at the mercy of the elements, and that's becoming worse and worse. So they've learned to just breathe or they burn out. Just because you open a giant lab type facility that has a controlled environment doesn't mean that it all just works at the push of a button. It's still plants and people. So remember, it takes people to feed people, and there's no perfect science to working with people.
So how instrumental was it that you aligned yourself with people that had experience? Because there's a lot of, just like you said, a lot of moving parts deciding what equipment to use, whether you're going to outsource vendors or whether you're going to sort of roll your own solution, and then challenges in terms of figuring out what the market looks like. You were new to Milwaukee as well, so building those relationships, were there partners that helped or people that were instrumental for you and just getting off the ground and up and running?
There were some folks who were, there were business arrangements in place where people were getting paid to do their job. Organizations were getting paid to do their job. And, a little word of mouth here or there helps. And there's some folks that were really kind of able to see the vision. And I kind of think where I would say kind of those folks, those organizations, they were advocates for us, and that helped open doors. And, Milwaukee's nicknamed Smallwaukie, where everybody knows your name kind of thing. So, it's when you're an outsider doing something new and risky, of which it's failed in the past year. So there's a lot of skepticism, failed everywhere. It's an uphill battle, but we had some early adopters between restaurants and a local a food bank called Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin. They were an early stage partner. So the kind of is really the customers. We had some early adopters that really helped, aside from the sale and getting some income in, which was essential. It's really kind of helping us understand the market. And that's where things, exponentially scale up in terms of the networking and additional business. But it takes a lot of time. It takes time to grow. It takes time to grow. It takes time to grow plants. It takes time to grow relationships. And it takes a really long time to grow relationships in the Midwest compared to New York. In New York, you could end up being best friends after lunch because everyone's a transplant and is kind of coming from some other background and is, I think, a bit more receptive to the process. And, no one's actually from there. And here everyone is from here. And
Yeah.
that's a little bit different of a mentality. So, it takes time to grow the relationships, especially in a market like this.
Well, that's hitting home personally because I'm actually in Minnesota right now. And like I said, I grew up in New York, and the biggest shift for me was just interacting with people because in New York, everyone's sort of doing their own thing, but you can have your own social circles. And then there's a Midwest friendliness that you have to get acclimated to and saying hi to everyone and how's your day and how's it going. It's like slowing down a little bit, which I need to get used to more and more. And I wonder if it was the same for you. Is it just a big shift in the way of living and personalities? I'm sure that takes some getting used to.
It does, yeah. Especially when you're trying to get a job done, and no matter like, and time is money. Like,
Yeah.
the electric company doesn't care about whether or not I spent 3 hours, talking to some folks about the weather. They want to get paid. So then all of a sudden you're getting squeezed on one end to get paid, and on the other end to be, to calm down and be friendly. And it's like, oh, wow. At least in New York, it's like, on both, you're not getting squeezed. Everyone wants your money, and everyone wants you, and you want everyone else's money, and
Yeah.
time is money, and you're moving. So it's taught me a lot coming here and doing this, because it's really kind of brought me back to the basics of farming. And I think the mentality of farming and slowing down a little bit, because you can't, just like the plants, you can't make them move any quicker than they are. And to a certain degree, actually, we're quite good at growing. We
Yeah.
grow 2.5 times quicker than Mother Nature. So
Yeah. Yeah. What was the decision process for determining what you're going to grow? I see on the site that you're growing Italian basil and a salad blend. Was it just some experimenting back and forth, or did you have an idea when you started what you were going to be growing?
there was a little bit of experimentation, a little bit. We threw a whole bunch of different types of seeds in the farm when we first opened, and just kind of waited to see what would grow and how it would grow. So that's on the production and farming side. But on the sales and distribution side, which is really where my strong point is, I knew that I wanted as few products as possible and to be the best at it, and to kind of use that as my baseline. And we went with a salad blend on one end and the Italian basil on the other. And the strategy there was really, okay, well, the salad is a commodity and it's in large demand. It's going to allow me to open the door. And we sell wholesale, right?
Yeah.
We exist to support other businesses. We are a B2B solution around supply chain resilience. And I thought, well, the lettuce would be a great thing to do because it's easy. It opens up doors. And since it's wholesale, it opens up the back door. And the basil, on the other hand, is a premium herb, which is hard to find. It's expensive. It's got a much better profit margin, but the demand is much less, or the market's smaller. But why don't we attack it like a dish where it's bottom up salad and top down premium herb that you're sprinkling? And really what that ended up translating to, which was intentional, was that the salad is almost like our Trojan horse, and it got us into the restaurants, and then we would upsell with our basil, which is like where all the profit lives. So it's kind of a simple way to break it down. And that's kind of our go-to market strategy. And then since then, we continued on those products, and because we became so well known as a brand, the end consumers, our customer, the end consumers, they wanted to bring us home. So we got a lot of requests to be available in retail. So we then launched a retail line in grocery stores, which is pretty cool. That was last year. And then this year, we moved into our third phase of product development, which is value-add premium sauces. So we do joint venture agreements with chefs to take our herbs and turn them into high-end condiments. So we have, bulk wholesale, we have retail, and now we have these premium sauces. And then since then, that's from a product development, kind of like shelf placement, but the products themselves, we've also added a microgreens line, and we're in the works of adding on butterhead lettuce.
Okay. So as someone who's new to the vertical farming industry, what's been some of your frustrations or realizations when working with folks in this space?
Yeah, I came in cold. A couple of Google searches, more so talking to a lot of people. I came in completely cold. Couldn't grow a tomato to save my life. Probably still can't in a traditional format, but too much secrecy and BS, and they kind of go hand in hand. But there's a lot of big organizations out there that have like VC back funding, and They don't share the information. And that's just how it goes. Because it's at the end of the day, it's just a data mill. It is when you really want to get into it. We try to, take some of that operational discipline and apply it, but obviously with the love and care that we're still producing food that feeds our neighbors. But yeah, there's a lot of guarding around the IP. But then I think the larger majority of the industry players, participants, I think they're just full of it. And then they say, I don't want to share my data because it's special. It's like, your information is not special. Like, it's really not that complicated what you're doing. This is not biomolecular engineering curing childhood leukemia. Like, give it a rest, calm down. The margins aren't there. It's air, light, and water. Relax. You don't see chefs freaking out over someone stealing this little piece of paper that's in their lapel pocket that has like the right dose of salt and a pinch of secret ingredient number 5 to make the sauce. Like, give it a rest. So it's really that's what's stifling the industry, is that there's no real reliable information out there to help fast track the process and prevent folks like myself and future efforts from making the same mistakes. So we're making the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah, I get that. I understand. What about the relationship with buyers and having them understand the value of growing produce that's grown indoors?
Communicating value is hard, and then getting them to believe it is even harder. For hundreds of years, thousands of years, food's grown outside by farmers, and it's given to the public. And now food can be grown indoors by a different type of farmer and still given to the public, but in a different type of way. And getting buyers, specifically businesses, to understand the value proposition behind the way in which we grow and what that affords you, they got to just take 5 minutes out of your day, take a step back and realize this, like what we're offering. I mean, it's really light manufacturing with a green assembly line, where our widget is a plant and we handle it with care and love. But it's the same thing every week, 52 weeks a year, guaranteed. So, they're used to unreliable supply, meaning it's not available, or the quality sucks, or one day it's this product and the next day it's a different product. And it's like, hold on, no, we are a guaranteed resource to reinforce your supply chain. If you know you need lettuce year round, subscribe. That's where I'm going with this subscription. Subscribe, set it and forget it, and go focus on the other headaches that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
That's why we exist. And then they think, well, okay, well, that's a convenience factor. You're still too much. Well, okay. All right, CFO. The basil you buy, you have about a 40% loss rate, and you're paying $9 a pound. I charge, let's say, 14, and you have a 0%. Who's more money? I mean, I learned that in 6th grade. 0% loss. But they'd rather just take the loss and just buy from one central large source than make the effort to then buy from individuals. And I get it. Yeah. It's a headache. They got so much on their plate, but I'm really urging folks to consider, the new way of growing and supplying, and to try to, it's really not going to get supported unless the buyers ultimately get behind it. And they are, at least they are here. But, I wish it could happen at a quicker rate. I'm not, pushing. I'm now starting to, I'm not pushing, but rather it's a pull component where just I'm answering the phones instead of making the phone calls. We're onto something, and I think a lot of folks across the country are doing similar things, and it's fantastic. And it's a lower food cost than you expect. It's a better product that's on your menu than anything else. And there's a story behind it that your end consumer is absolutely going to pay for, because it's in their backyard.
What's been the reception from, you mentioned you get support from the people who are buying from you directly, but just in terms of the community, are you getting support from any of the local agencies or government support? We're seeing some states that are actually recognizing the value of CEA. Virginia, for example, had a national CEA day last year, and the governor has made it clear that he wants to make that a focus for Virginia. I'm wondering if Wisconsin is doing something similar.
I don't know if Wisconsin necessarily as a state is getting behind like CEA in a big way, But what is happening is we're working with the state and local agencies that feed up to the USDA, and we've been very successful in getting resources from them and being recognized. And not only are we grateful for that, but it's promising and it also validates our efforts. And not necessarily that our business model is contingent, the success of it is contingent on these subsidies and whatnot, but it certainly supports, we're really kind of a bold trailblazer kind of in a new space. And if it's not going to be the deep pockets of Elon Musk or Dell or IBM, and it's individuals like me, like taking, on the risk of trying to do this, like you absolutely need subsidies. No individual can afford to just like figure it all out on their own. So it's sort of reassuring that I see big government getting behind this. And the funding is literally going towards, essentially it's R&D. It's R&D to help cover my expenses, to build up my business. And it's not like I'm pocketing anything. And then secondly, it's going into, on the sales side, the money that goes into sales, and that's to build a better local infrastructure. And that's involving many parties. So it's top down and bottom up.
What has this been like for you as you're leading the team, being the CEO, the front-facing person, and then having to figure out what growing the team is going to look like and who you're going to be hiring and who's next to tap into? I'm just wondering, for you as the leader into this new space, how that's been for you.
It sounded really cool 5 years ago. It's wild. A good friend of mine who's pretty successful running a very large organization. And he said, being the CEO or in this like level, owner leadership position, the only real stress that why your day is different than someone else's is that you just have to make a lot more decisions than the average person.
Yeah.
They need to be right more, not more often than someone else, but it's just, you have to have more correct decisions, not a higher percentage, just a lot more of them. So you got to be on point. And then when you're dealing with people, and I don't have a background in management, managing multiple people, especially in a space that I created and I own, of which there's no real thing to point to. It's not like I'm poaching people from a competitive business, like Burger King's taking McDonald's employees. This is a new frontier, and it's been a wild ride, a lot of trial and error. Our turnover was horrific. People don't show up or whatever. It's just a tough spot to be in, but we survived that. We have a really great team. It's a team of 4 farmers full time. We have a bunch of other folks, but that's really the core. And yeah, as a leader, it's learning like a farm. You can't make the plants grow quicker. And that very same person who gave me this advice around the, what is different between a CEO, my role compared to maybe some other people's roles or jobs, just a lot more decision making really at the end of the day. The other thing is when you have a vision for your business is your baby. He has kids, and he made the example of like, listen, you have your kid, you get them to like a certain point, very young, but at that point, they start to kind of decide who they are. And you got to kind of think of your business the same way. Yes, you have a vision for it downstream, but in the moment, after it's birthed and it's there and it's kind of standing up a little bit, it might fall down, it might stand back up. You help it with that process. You kind of got to let it lead you instead of you lead it. Don't force it. Forcing it can go very wrong. You got to listen to your baby and make sure that you are able to adapt and stay flexible, all the while making sure you hold on to the core values and some of the end goals of what you wanted to achieve.
Is there anything you would have done differently knowing now what you didn't know back then?
Not do it, no. I've lost years of my life with this thing. I would have gone smaller out of the gate. I would have planned better from a technical standpoint. I don't know how I would have done that second component. I don't know how I could have planned better, but because at a certain point I had to pull the trigger and we just did it. And I would have made sure that I had some other critical support roles in place ahead of time. And that's just that as well. I don't know how I could have accomplished that without having the farm there. You don't know until you know. The first thing though, I would have gone a little bit smaller than what I did, since it's a personally funded and operated business. And I did not intend to do this on my own. I did not intend to be the farmer nor the operations manager. I did not intend to take on this much responsibility. This was not meant to be a one person show. It kind of, it just panned out that way. So now I'm trying to take a step back and make it more of a communal initiative, as it always should have been, right? I don't need to be the high man on the totem pole. In fact, I try to stay behind the scenes as best I can, but people need a face with a business. So especially now, especially when it's food and it's a farm. But yeah, I think those are the three things. Plan, you know, go a little smaller, plan and plan again, and know that your plans are probably going to get thrown out, and make sure that you have support. You know, support people. It could be advisors that have some vested interest. It could be a partner. Just make sure you have support. It's very lonely.
What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
What does the first stage of success look like for me? There's multiple stages or phases of success, and what will I do with that success? So understanding, like trying to understand when can I take a breath and pat myself on the back? And then if that's what I'm doing, what am I doing with that? What does that mean? Is it profitability, fundraising? Is it, you know, an award? Is it sleeping longer? Yeah. So, cool. And then what do you do with it?
Yeah. Well, Chris, we're wrapping up here, but I just want to thank you for providing a breath of fresh air. And I know we talk a lot to big owners and farms, and we've had conversations with people who are just getting started. But I think your perspective, and having had the experience in restaurants and New York City and doing this crazy thing to start a farm on your own, I think has been eye-opening for you for sure. But it's been really helpful for this audience to get a realistic picture of what to expect and what to realize, that it's not all wine and roses, but if you do have the passion for it and you believe in it, it's clear that you sort of develop this resiliency. And I see that as a New Yorker, sort of that tough skin to kind of just take what comes at you and realize that there's no one coming to save you and you've got to figure this out on your own. And it shows that you've been doing just that. So I really appreciate you being really frank and open and honest about the realities of running a farm. And it looks like you have turned the corner, hopefully, and there's some brighter days ahead.
Yeah, we do. We do indeed. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I'm glad I got a platform here to kind of share some of my experiences. You know, we're pretty easy to find on the internet, info at 100-acre.org. Just do a quick Google search, 100 Acre, Wisconsin. We're pretty high up there on that, however these Google things work, algorithms. Don't confuse us with the vineyard, which is amazing. They're out in California, 100 Acre Vineyard. They are good. But yeah, we're always interested in folks reaching out, whether it's, you know, for job opportunities, collaborations. Of course, you know, we're now beginning our investor fundraising process for Farm 2 here in Milwaukee, which will be a farm about 4 times the size, due to open next year. So yeah, it's always open to folks reaching out. So thanks again for having me. Yeah,
we'll make sure all that contact information is in the show notes, as well as the website and all your contact info, your LinkedIn as well, so folks can get in contact with you. I really appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation.